Father Bless, if it's off topic but important, the beloved and wise Elder Gabriel of Mount Athos says that one shouldn't receive Holy Communion from an Ecumenist priest. On the other hand, some people who, although condemning the heresy, wouldn't say that one should stop receiving Holy Communion from an Ecumenist priest. Can you elaborate on that, please? Well, yes, of course. And I actually been several times to see Elder Gabriel, and the fathers down the road from him at the cell of Panaguda, and the other fathers who are all disciples of St. Paisios. So Elder Gabriel is talking about well-known, attested, unabashed ecumenists who are pushing the heresy. I think that's who he has in mind. And he has, in his context, he has the particular leadership above him in mind. And he has ceased commemoration of them for that purpose. Now, there are many different contexts in the church today. There are many different churches. There are many different bishops. There are many different places. So you cannot generalize. And you can't, it's not easy to say in every case, this person is an ecumenist in the sense of pushing ecumenism, defending ecumenism, confessing ecumenism. The zealot ecclesiology would have us, the not patristic ecclesiology and undiscerning ecclesiology of the people on the far right who've fallen off into a zeal not according to knowledge. And unfortunately, one of my old coworkers is one of the greatest creators of the hothouse effect today in the church in America. And, you know, this zeal not according to knowledge, which is speaking out of time and out of turn and without anybody asking him and all the rest. So God to help him. He's not very helpful to the struggle. But in any case, he's right, he thinks. So that's all that matters. But so the zealot ecclesiology would have it that there's communicating vessels, like in a plumbing system, all the water ultimately is connected, right? From the source, it comes into the house and it goes all throughout the house. And so if you're in communion over on that side of the house in the Church of Georgia with the Patriarch of Georgia, and he's in communion with the Patriarch of Alexandria or whatever, and you're in the bottom of Africa down there, because they're all in communion through the local churches and through the patriarchs. That means we're all ecumenists. That means that you got to break with everybody. You got to walk away from everything. You've got to cease commemoration, communion with all these different bishops and local churches, and then they talk about humanist churches, or they're talking about like modernist churches. And I say to myself, well, okay, the church is Christ. The local church, the divine liturgy that happens in this place, in this time, that's Christ, right? That's not something else, right? And so can it be an ecumenist church? Can a church be an ecumenist? I mean, a human being can promote ecumenism. He can teach ecumenism. Ecumenism, what do we mean by that? We mean an ecclesiological heresy. We mean someone who's clearly denying the oneness, the holiness, the Catholicity, the apostolicity of the church, right? The one holy Catholic Church. They're denying that. It's a very particular thing. There are many errors today in terms of modernism and secularization and aspects of the ecumenical movement, bad judgments. Father Pierre from Rose even criticized somebody like Father George Florovsky, who in other respects he seemed to have some respect for and honored. But in some ways he said, well, he's maybe not that perceptive of the effects and the impacts of ecumenism. And so you can say there's a whole spectrum of orthodoxy to heterodoxy in the question of ecumenism. You heard tonight in one of these stories that did you remember the first story we said? St. John Chrysostom had these people in his church, but they were in the church, communing in the church of St. John Chrysostom, but they had the ideas of Macedonius, right? And the husband repented. The wife didn't repent, and then that miracle happened. She was there in communion. She had heretical ideas. So there are many people today who are pushing ideas which are not patristic. They're not the patristic consensus. On the topic of reception, we've talked about this many times. There are many people, very good people, friends of mine, who don't really get the full 100% of the patristic vision. And, they say, maybe I don't. Okay, we'll see. God will determine in due time. And that's how it usually works. It takes time, maybe even a generation or two. And then we see through God's providence how things shake out. So we'll see. But in my poor estimation, they're not getting the whole patristic consensus. And then they're getting things wrong. And you could say, well, that is an ecumenistic stance. Wouldn't be wrong to say that. And yet it would be very undiscerning to say, that's an ecumenist, I must break communion with that person. St. Nicodemus points to this in his canons, and he says about ceasing commemoration of an erring hierarch, he says, if you think he could be corrected, don't break communion rashly. If he doesn't promote that teaching publicly, don't break communion rashly. So there is discernment in all things, right? So we don't have the zealot ecclesiology of the communing vessels before a council. When the church has come down and said this new teaching, this heretical teaching, these various teachings, rightly divide the word of truth in the council, like the Second Ecumenical Council, pneumatomachy or heretics, this is a heretical teaching. You must not hold this to be an Orthodox Christian. Yes, we've laid down the one holy Catholic Apostolic Church, but the various versions or ideas or theories were not laid down in the 2nd century. They were not addressed by the 2nd century. The Second Ecumenical Council in the 4th century. So we have to address them in council. That's how the church deals with healing these wounds and these errors in council. You've got to work for a council. If you break off into little sects over here, 14 different old calendars, jurisdictions, that's not the patristic way to work toward an ecumenical council or a local council to condemn the heresy. That's undermining that effort, all right? So practically, lack of discernment and a patristic wisdom is not apparent here. So coming back to your question, does Elder Gabriel or any elder, let's not make it personal, there are elders like Elder Gabriel, others who teach this, is he telling us that we should determine and therefore, like, what is the criteria there? Did he lay down criteria for us to say, well, this guy's an ecumenist, but this bishop's not an ecumenist? Yes and no. All of it presupposes discernment, right? You've got to see and look at this particular bishop and this particular church and this thing, and you've got to make an assessment. I think in his context, which is really what he's speaking to, he's not trying to teach the whole universe and talk about what people should do in Romania or in Georgia or in Bulgaria. I don't think that's what he's assuming there. He's saying, look, these are principles. This is what I'm doing. This is how I think we should deal with this. This is how we should protect ourselves and also struggle for the unity of the church. And so if you have somebody over there who's bareheaded preaching heresy, avoid him. Do not commune from his hand. As much, in my understanding, as much to protect yourself from what he teaches, which is a question of spiritual, walking the narrow spiritual life, and also to not encourage him and support the further teaching of the heresy. It's as much pedagogical as it is a question of spiritual protection. So there's several things going on in that stance. I agree that it's beneficial on a very basic pedagogical and spiritual level for Orthodox Christians who understand and see to say, I'm not going to go into one of these sectarian groups. I'm not going to start my own church. I'm not going to go and live in a hole somewhere, but I'm also not going to just walk around and indiscriminately act as if nothing's wrong. I'm going to stand in my time and place, in my parish. I'm going to witness to the faith. I'm going to avoid giving the occasion for sin, making it seem like it doesn't matter if you're an ecumenist or not. In other words, you teach the heretical ecclesiological heresy of ecumenism, not just somebody who went to a meeting with a Protestant. That's not ecumenism, all right? It has to take on the flesh, theologically speaking, of the heresy. It has to be lived and taught, and not just somebody made an error, right? There are people who make errors all the time. Doesn't make them into a leader of heresy. So there's much here that demands a particular application in time and space in your particular church, in your particular parish, in your particular time, to see how should I walk, right? Discernment. It is the greatest of the virtues. There's no substitute for it. You've got to have discernment. You've got to have a spiritual father. You've got to see how you're going to walk in each case and work for the upbuilding of the church, work for the overcoming of the heresy, but not by further division and further pharisaical condemnations and further rejection of holy elders and saints, which is what we see going on among certain people today, which is tragedy, delusional and tragic. So be careful on that temptation on the right and also on the temptation on the left. Walk the royal path. So I can't answer your particular case. I don't know what you're talking about, who the bishop you have in mind, right? So that's what I can give you. And there's much more, but that's enough.